Have you ever felt like you were standing in front of something so big that your mind whispered, there is no way you can win this? Maybe it is a problem that keeps resurfacing no matter how hard you try to fix it. Maybe it is a fear you do not tell anyone about because it feels too embarrassing or heavy. Maybe it is the feeling that everyone around seems stronger, more prepared, more confident, while you are stuck with doubts that refuse to leave. The interesting thing is that almost everyone has heard the story of David and Goliath, but most people only know the simplified version, the one taught to children, the brave boy, the huge giant, and the miracle. But when you look closer, you realize something surprising. You realize that this story is not just about a boy beating a giant. It is about a situation that mirrors exactly what you face in your own life. And here is where the shock comes in. Most people believe David won because he was chosen, almost as if it had nothing to do with preparation, strategy, or real emotional struggle. But ancient records and modern studies reveal something much deeper. The battle in the Valley of Elah was not just a physical confrontation. It was a psychological, emotional, and even strategic clash between two completely different types of warriors. Goliath was built for a type of face-to-face combat that relied on size and intimidation. David came with a completely different skill set that no one had taken seriously before that moment. When you understand this, the entire story changes. It stops being a simple miracle and becomes a powerful lesson about what happens when someone decides to confront their fear instead of running from it. Before we go any deeper, let me validate you. If you clicked on this video or are listening to this part of the story, there is a good chance that you are carrying something that feels overwhelming. Maybe you are fighting a quiet battle that no one sees. Maybe you feel behind in life or underestimated by the people around you. Maybe you feel like you are doing everything you can, but nothing seems to move. I get it, and this story gets it too. That is why it has survived for thousands of years. Not because it is pretty or heroic, but because it speaks directly to the feeling of being small in front of something massive. It speaks to the frustration of being overlooked, ignored, or treated as if you do not matter. David knew exactly what that felt like. Long before he faced Goliath, he faced the feeling of being invisible. And that is where we begin. Long before the battle, there was a setting. Israel was facing one of its most dangerous enemies, the Philistines. The two armies were camped on opposite hills with a valley between them. This was not a random place. The Valley of Elah was a crucial passage that controlled trade routes, which means whoever won that battle would gain enormous strategic power. Soldiers of that time were not just fighters. They were trained specialists with specific roles. Goliath was a champion, a type of warrior known for stepping out alone to settle disputes between armies without a full war. Historical studies and archaeological findings show that a warrior of his category would have been heavily armored, possibly weighing more than any normal man could carry. His height, estimated to be over 2.5 meters, was intimidating enough to break the spirit of any soldier who dared to think about confronting him. But here is where most people stop the story too early. Goliath was not simply big. He was trained for a specific kind of battle that required slow movement, close range, and heavy armor. David was none of that. He was a shepherd, a teenager, untrained in traditional warfare. At least that is what everyone assumed. In reality, shepherds were experts in terrain, distance, and precision. They used slings to defend sheep from predators, and historical data shows that a well-trained slingstone could reach speeds comparable to a modern baseball pitch. In other words, David was not as unprepared as people often imagine. He just did not fit the expected profile of a warrior, and that is exactly why he was ignored. Even his own brothers dismissed him. They saw him as the youngest, the least important, someone who should stay quiet and accept his position. But that feeling, the feeling of being underestimated, is one of the reasons why this story still matters today. Because everyone at some point feels like David felt. Small, undervalued, not taken seriously. And when you hear what actually happened between David and Goliath, you realize something powerful. The giant in front of you is not always as strong as you think, and you are not as weak as you imagine. This is the beginning of the story. And in the next part, we dive into the journey that brought David to the battlefield. A journey that was not planned, not heroic, and not expected by anyone. But before that, keep this thought in mind. Sometimes, the greatest victories start in the places where no one is watching. David did not wake up that morning thinking he would face a giant. He did not train for it. He was not preparing himself for a heroic moment. And he definitely was not expecting his life to change forever. What makes this part of the story so interesting is how ordinary everything seemed. His father Jesse called him and asked him to take food to his brothers who were serving in the army. That was it. A simple errand. Something anyone could do. And it is fascinating how many of the biggest turning points in life begin exactly like that. Not with a dramatic moment, but with something so normal that you barely notice how important it is. Sometimes you think you're just doing what you always do, walking through your routine, and without warning, you end up exactly where you need to be for your purpose to begin. Before he left, David was still doing what shepherds did every day. He was taking care of the sheep, protecting them from danger, walking long distances, staying alone for hours, and learning to pay attention to everything around him. Shepherds in ancient Israel were not lazy or weak. They were resourceful and resilient. They had to survive in rough terrain, constantly alert to predators like lions and bears. And because of that, they developed incredible precision with tools like the sling. Historical studies show that the sling was not a toy or a primitive weapon. In the hands of a skilled user, it was a serious instrument capable of striking enemies at distances most soldiers could not reach. That means while everyone thought David was simply a young boy without experience, life had actually been training him quietly in the background. As David approached the battlefield, the atmosphere was completely different from the peaceful hills he was used to. Imagine the tension in the air. Thousands of soldiers waiting day after day while the giant came forward to mock Israel. The frustration, the fear, the humiliation. And something important was happening inside King Saul. This was a man who once had courage, confidence, and the respect of his people. But now he was paralyzed. He looked like a leader, but he did not feel like one anymore. He had lost the sense of direction that once guided him. And the presence of Goliath only made that emptiness worse. Studies on leadership psychology often say that the greatest danger for a leader is not external enemies, but internal insecurity. That is exactly what Saul was facing. He had the armor, the throne, and the authority, but he had lost the inner strength that made all of that meaningful. When David arrived and heard Goliath challenging Israel, something inside him reacted in a way that surprised everyone around him. His brothers were embarrassed. They thought he was speaking out of pride or naivety. They accused him of coming just to watch the battle, as if he did not have responsibilities back home. But this reaction is incredibly human. Whenever someone comienza to break the pattern that everyone expects, people around them often feel threatened. They do not understand where the courage comes from because they themselves feel stuck. It is easier to criticize someone's confidence than to confront their own fear. This is exactly what happened with David's brothers. They saw his courage as arrogance because they had already accepted defeat in their hearts. David did not argue with them. He simply refused to absorb their negativity. And this is one of the most powerful lessons from this part of the story. Sometimes, you do not need to convince people who cannot see your purpose. Sometimes, silence is stronger than explanation. David moved forward and was taken to Saul, who looked at him with disbelief. Saul saw a boy, David saw a mission. Saul saw weakness. David saw opportunity. Saul saw risk. David saw purpose. And before Saul could reject him completely, David shared something that changed everything. He explained how he had faced lions and bears while protecting the sheep. He said he had survived situations that should have killed him. To Saul, it sounded impossible. To David, it was just his life experience. Here's something interesting, backed by studies in neurology and behavioral science. The human brain builds confidence not through imagination, but through memory. When you remember what you have already survived, your brain becomes more capable of facing new challenges. That is exactly what David was doing. He was accessing memories of past victories that prepared him mentally and emotionally for the giant ahead. When Saul heard this, he realized that David was not just optimistic. He was prepared, just not in the way traditional soldiers were. There was still one more problem. Saul wanted David to wear his armor. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and designed for a type of combat that did not fit David's skills. And this part is symbolic. Many times in life, people try to put expectations on you that do not belong to you. They want you to fight like them, think like them, behave like them, even when it makes you weaker. When David tried on the armor and almost tripped under its weight, he understood something powerful. You cannot win your battles wearing someone else's identity. You cannot face your giants trying to be someone you are not. David took off the armor, not out of disrespect, but out of wisdom. He knew that to face something extraordinary, he needed to trust the way he had been prepared, even if others did not understand. So David walked toward the battlefield with nothing but his sling, his staff, and the confidence that came from years of unseen preparation. And this is where the shift happens. The journey that began with a simple errand was leading him straight into the center of a moment that would define history. And what he would do next would completely change how the world understands courage. There is a moment in every story where time feels like it slows down, where everything you thought you knew about yourself and everything people said you could not do suddenly stands face to face with reality. That is exactly what happened when David walked down into the valley of Elah. Imagine the scene. Two hills filled with soldiers watching silently. One young shepherd walking alone toward a warrior who looked more like a moving wall than a human being. The sunlight reflecting off Goliath's armor, the echo of each step David took on the dry ground. Nothing about this moment looked balanced or fair. And that is exactly why it has inspired people for thousands of years. Goliath started shouting as soon as he saw David. His voice carried through the valley like thunder. He insulted him, mocked him, and questioned why Israel had sent a boy instead of a real warrior. From Goliath's perspective, this made sense. He was trained for close combat, heavily protected and armed with weapons designed to crush opponents with overwhelming force. Historical studies show that Goliath's armor likely weighed more than most men could lift. His spear had a tip of iron that alone weighed several kilograms. He was built to intimidate, and his confidence came from years of winning battles by sheer power. But Goliath also had a weakness that most people never notice. His size was not only his strength, but also his limitation. Modern medical theories suggest that someone of his height may have suffered from acromegaly, a condition that can reduce peripheral vision. This means that while he looked unstoppable, he might not have seen clearly at a distance. David did not answer Goliath with fear. His reply was calm but powerful. He said that while Goliath came with sword and spear, he was coming in the name of the Lord. To some, this sounds like religious bravery. But when you look deeper, you notice something richer. David was not relying on his own strength. He was relying on a combination of faith, memory, and preparation. He knew what he had survived before. He knew he was stepping into a moment he had not chosen, yet felt destined for. And this confidence created a psychological shift. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. That is what David carried in his heart as he continued walking toward the giant. The armies watched as David stopped by a small stream and selected 5 smooth stones. There is symbolic meaning here, but also scientific relevance. Smooth stones fly more accurately from a sling because their consistent shape reduces air resistance. Studies from Cambridge and other research groups have shown that a stone launched by a skilled slinger can reach speeds around 30 meters per second. That is the speed of a Major League Baseball pitch, but with a denser projectile. In other words, a single hit to the forehead could cause severe trauma or even instant collapse. David was not improvising. He was using a weapon he had mastered through years of protecting sheep. While Goliath expected a slow approach and hand-to-hand combat, David was preparing for a long-range strike before the giant could even react. As David took his position, something incredible happened. He ran forward. Not carefully, not hesitantly, he ran. This moment is crucial because running meant committing fully to the attack. It meant he was not second-guessing himself. It meant he was not negotiating with fear. Picture the scene in slow motion. David spinning the sling above his head with incredible precision. The air cutting around the stone as it reached maximum speed. His eyes focused intensely on the only unprotected area on Goliath's body, the space between the eyes where the helmet did not cover. Every movement was precise, trained, intentional. Then the release, a sound you could almost imagine cutting through the silence. The stone traveled across the space between them with force and accuracy that no one expected. It hit Goliath in the forehead and sank in. The giant's expression changed instantly. His body stiffened and then he fell forward, collapsing face first onto the ground. For a moment, the entire valley was silent. Not a breath, not a word. It was the kind of silence that comes when the impossible happens right in front of your eyes. David moved quickly, not out of fear, but out of purpose. He stood over Goliath and used the giant's own sword to finish what he started. This was not cruelty. It was the way ancient battles define victory with clarity. And as soon as the Philistine army saw their champion defeated, panic spread among them. On the other side, the soldiers of Israel erupted in shouts and ran forward with renewed courage. One act of unexpected bravery had completely changed the direction of the battle. But here is the deeper part of this moment. David was not supposed to win. Everything about the situation said he would fail. His age, his size, his lack of armor, his lack of recognition, and the expectations of everyone around him. Yet the victory came from someone who was overlooked because he was different. This is the moment the story becomes more than a historical event. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a reminder that giants do not fall because you match their strength. They fall because you understand your own. In life, your battles rarely look fair. Sometimes you feel outnumbered, unprepared, or underestimated. But this scene teaches something powerful. The size of the challenge does not define the outcome. What defines the outcome is the combination of preparation, faith, courage, and the decisions you make when fear tries to take over. David stepped into the valley alone, but he did not step in empty. He stepped in with years of unseen training, with clarity about who he was, and with confidence in what he carried inside. This was not just the defeat of a giant. It was the moment the world discovered someone who had been invisible for too long. And now that the giant has fallen, we begin to understand what this victory really means. The moment Goliath fell, everything shifted. You can almost imagine the shock on the faces of the soldiers who had spent more than a month waking up every morning to the sound of the giant's taunts. Their fear had become a routine. Their helplessness had turned into a habit. And suddenly, with one single strike, the entire atmosphere changed. But the meaning of that victory goes far beyond the battlefield. What happened that day reveals truths about strength, fear, purpose, and identity that matter just as much today as they did thousands of years ago. The first thing this story teaches is that human strength alone is never the full story. Goliath represents everything that looks powerful from the outside. His armor, his weapons, his size, and his confidence made him seem unbeatable. But real strength is not always visible. Real strength often works in silence, hidden in daily experiences, in challenges survived, in quiet moments when no one is watching. David had no armor and no official training. Yet he had something far more valuable. He had a purpose, and he had preparation that came from places no one respected. This reminds us that your greatest abilities might not be the ones people celebrate. Sometimes, your greatest weapon is something you learned in a season where you felt small and unnoticed. There is also a psychological truth here that many experts talk about today. Fear grows when you stare at it without moving. The soldiers of Israel listened to Goliath every day. His words shaped their expectations. His size shaped their imagination. They let their fear grow until it looked bigger than reality. But David had a different perspective. He had not spent weeks listening to Goliath's voice. He had not let the giant's presence define his identity. Instead of focusing on the threat in front of him, he focused on the purpose inside him. Modern studies show that when people shift their attention from fear to action, the brain begins to respond differently. Confidence increases and stress decreases. David demonstrated this instinctively when he ran toward the giant instead of waiting passively. He acted before fear had time to grow. Another powerful meaning behind this story is the idea that the biggest giants in life are not always physical. Some giants are internal. Doubt, insecurity, shame, anxiety, financial pressure, failure, rejection, and the fear of not being enough can feel just as intimidating as a warrior standing in front of you. Goliath is a symbol of everything that screams you cannot win. He represents the voices that try to convince you that you are too small, too late, too weak, or too unprepared. But what made David different was how he understood identity. He did not define himself by what others thought of him. He did not measure himself by appearances. He measured himself by the preparation and the purpose he carried inside. When he said he came in the name of the Lord, he was declaring that his identity came from something greater than the challenge in front of him. There is something deeply meaningful in how David's life transformed after this moment. Before the battle, he was simply the youngest son, the boy who fed the sheep, the one others ignored. After the battle, he became a symbol of courage for an entire nation. But notice something important. The victory did not change who he was. It revealed who he already was. Many people think success creates identity. The truth is that identity shapes success. What you believe about yourself influences the decisions you make, the risks you take, and the battles you are willing to face. David's victory was not the beginning of his strength. It was the moment the world finally saw the strength he had built quietly when no one else believed in him. This story also teaches something essential about faith. Faith is not a distant idea or a feeling you turn to only when everything collapses. Faith is the act of trusting that there is purpose in your journey, even when the path looks unfair or confusing. Faith is believing that what you carry inside is enough for the challenge in front of you. When David walked into the valley, he did not have certainty about how everything would unfold. But he believed that the same God who had helped him survive lions and bears would give him the clarity he needed at the right moment. Faith is not blind confidence. It is remembered confidence. It is looking back at everything you survived and realizing you were never alone. That gives you strength to face what comes next. There's also a very human lesson here about comparison. Every soldier in the army kept comparing themselves to Goliath. They looked at their own limitations and decided the giant was too big. David never compared himself to Goliath. He compared Goliath to God. And from that perspective, the giant suddenly did not look so impossible. Comparison steals courage. It makes you forget your strengths and exaggerates your weaknesses. When you stop comparing yourself to what intimidates you and start recognizing what you actually have, your mind becomes clearer and your fear becomes smaller. The victory of David is not about a miracle that only he could experience. It is about a mindset, a posture, and a belief that anyone can carry. Your giant may not look like a warrior with armor. It might look like a diagnosis, a financial burden, a broken relationship, a personal failure, or a dream that feels too far away. But the meaning remains the same. Giants fall when you stop letting them define your identity. Giants fall when you use what you have instead of wishing you had something else. Giants fall when you realize that purpose beats intimidation every time. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is that victory does not always show up through the people who look ready. Victory often comes through the people who have been quietly prepared by life in ways no one noticed. That is why this story still matters, because it reminds you that even if you feel overlooked or underestimated, there is strength inside you that has been built through every hardship, every tear, every challenge, and every step you thought no one cared about. David's victory is not just ancient history. It is a reminder that you are not defined by the giants you face. You are defined by the courage you choose when you finally face them. When the dust finally settled on that battlefield, something interesting happened that people sometimes overlook. The victory was not just David's. It was a shift in the entire nation. Israel did not suddenly become stronger overnight. They did not train harder during that morning. They did not bring new weapons or new strategies to the field. What truly changed was their perspective. They saw with their own eyes that one person who refuses to bow to fear can create a chain reaction powerful enough to move an entire people forward. And this is something that connects directly to your life right now. Because every time you face a giant, you are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for the future of everything and everyone that depends on the version of you that you are trying to become. It is fascinating when you think about how fear controls us. Modern psychology explains that the human brain is wired to avoid uncertainty at all costs. Researchers often call it the survival bias, the instinct that makes us overestimate danger and underestimate our ability to handle it. This means that in many moments of your life, the giant you think you are seeing is actually being enlarged by your own brain as a way to convince you to stay still. Goliath was huge, of course, but the panic the Israelite soldiers felt made him appear even bigger in their minds. And the same thing happens to you. Your fear does not only describe reality, it amplifies it. Which means that sometimes the moment you stop running and decide to face the problem head-on is the moment it starts shrinking. After David defeated Goliath, something subtle but deeply important happened. The giant fell, but the fear inside the people did not disappear instantly. It started dissolving slowly, moment after moment, as they processed what they had just witnessed. And this is crucial for you to understand, because maybe you are expecting that once you overcome one big challenge in your life, everything else will magically fix itself. But the truth is that growth rarely works that way. You defeat one giant, and another appears eventually. Not because life is unfair, but because you are becoming someone capable of handling bigger responsibilities and bigger levels of purpose. There is a detail in the biblical account that deserves attention here. David did not stop after the stone. He ran toward Goliath. He made sure the victory was complete. That action shows something powerful. Sometimes the beginning of your breakthrough is only the first hit. You still need to advance. You still need to finish what you started. Maybe your stone is the decision you made last week to change your habits, or start a new project, or walk away from something that was destroying you. But the rest of the battle is still ahead, and the world is waiting for you to run toward it, instead of standing and watching. If you think about it, the moment after a victory can be just as defining as the battle itself. David could have walked away proud, satisfied with what he accomplished. But instead, he used that moment as the foundation for the life he would build. His courage in the valley shaped the man he would become as king. And this is where your story mirrors his. Your next chapter is not created when everything is perfect. It's created in the messy and unpredictable moments right after a giant falls. That is when your identity becomes stronger, your purpose becomes clearer, and your mindset becomes more mature. Let me ask you something. What giant in your life has been shouting at you day after day? What challenge has been convincing you that you are not enough or not ready? What fear has been telling you to stay still when you know you need to move? Because whether you realize it or not, this story is no longer about ancient Israel. It is about you right now. And there is a reason you watched this video until this point. Something inside you knows that avoiding the giant is not working anymore. Something inside you knows that you are capable of much more than you have allowed yourself to believe. In the end, the true message of David and Goliath is not simply that the small can defeat the large. It is that faith combined with action rewrites impossible outcomes. It is that courage does not mean the absence of fear, but the decision to move even when fear is loud. And most importantly, it is that God often uses the most unlikely people to accomplish the most unexpected victories. If you ever felt too small, too unprepared, or too insignificant to make a difference, remember that David felt that way too before he stepped forward. Your giants will not disappear by themselves. They fall when you stop waiting for perfect conditions and decide to take the first step. The sling is already in your hands. The stone is already in your reach. The valley is right in front of you. And just like David, you do not walk alone. Even if you cannot see the outcome yet, the moment you choose to face your giant, the story begins to change. So as this video comes to an end, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what is the valley I need to walk into this week? Because maybe the next chapter of your life, the one you have been waiting for, begins with that single brave step.